Welcome to the SportsPro podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome once again to the SportsPro podcast. My name is Eoin Connolly. I'm the editor at large at SportsPro. Hope you're all very well indeed. We are turning our attention to the world of tennis this time, and here in the UK, we were getting to the end of what would be Wimbledon fortnight. Obviously, an absolute peak of the British sporting summer and the international sports calendar, but the tournament was cancelled this year. Doesn't mean work has stopped at the All England Lawn Tennis Club. And to talk a bit about what 2020 has meant for the event, for the organisation, and for the sport of tennis, I have the AELTC Commercial and Media Director, Mick Desmond. Hi, Mick.
Owen, how are you?
Very well, thanks. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Very good. Sitting in my garden.
Glad to hear it. And joining him, we've got the head of digital and communications, Alex Willis. Hi, Alex. Welcome back.
Thanks so much, Owen. Great to chat to you.
As ever, probably the first time in either of your careers that you could have expected to get to the end of these 2 weeks and not have seen any tennis. What's the last few months been like for AELTC? Because you're typically so concentrated around SW19, around this Wimbledon fortnight. There are very few brands where everything, very few sports brands where everything is kind of so concentrated into an event and a venue, and everything all kind of, it all speaks to each other. But there has been no Wimbledon Championships this year. So what have the past few months when you would have been scaling up for event time been like?
Well, I guess we obviously did as much as we possibly could up until the date. It was April the 1st when we announced that we were going to cancel the event this year. A huge amount of preparation had gone into it. We were watching the whole coronavirus unfold internationally and here in the UK, and it became very, very clearly obvious in the last 2 weeks of March that it was going to be impossible to hold our event for several reasons. One, because we play on grass, and therefore there's a very short window in timing that allows us to play on a grass surface. And I think secondly, more fundamentally, the whole sort of event of Wimbledon is very, very precious to us. It's not just about the tennis that's being played, but as you've mentioned, it is a huge event in the summer calendar, certainly here in the UK and globally. The fans are obviously a very, very important part of that. The whole infrastructure that goes around it. But we had, in many ways, probably something that a lot of other sporting events didn't have, that we had a full insurance policy that allowed us to make a clear decision. And therefore, as soon as we knew that we couldn't hold the event, and that was very much on logistical and medical grounds, we made that early call so that we could work very effectively with our partners, with all stakeholders, ticket holders, debenture holders, hospitality, of being able to give them a very early definitive sign of what we were going to do. It was a very disappointing day. I think everybody was truly sad. It was the first time since the Second World War that the championships had not been hosted. I think for the board, for the members, the staff, and indeed all our partners, I think everybody kind of shared that disappointment, but understood the rationale as to why we had cancelled the event. But I think we then quickly sort of turned our minds to, and Alex can talk about this in more detail, to still wanting to celebrate that window. How do we still celebrate what's special about Wimbledon? And as a team, we came up with a number of ideas. The board backed those ideas. We want to invest in those ideas. And I'm delighted that over the last, not just the last 2 weeks, but indeed over a sort of 6-week period, both leading up to the championships and during, we engaged in a lot of different activities, which I think have sort of not just celebrated, tennis and what is great about the Wimbledon Championships, but also we've taken we've acted in a number of ways to support different stakeholders, certainly within the community, which Alex, perhaps you can talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Mick was saying, the impact of cancellation, not just on us and in terms of what our summer looks like, but also on those stakeholder groups who rely on Wimbledon. We refer to as those without whom we couldn't stage the tournament. it was wanting to make sure that we could provide for them. And so we were pleased to announce just recently that we were able to provide some prize money to players. We've been able to compensate officials who would have worked at the tournament, and also look after those contractors and people that we work with, our commercial partners, and really to try and continue our positive relationship with them. But also, what more could we do to provide support for those out there, really struggling? And it may sound like small things, but being able to donate strawberries to hospitals, being able to donate the towels that would have been used for the 2020 championships to homelessness charities, being able to open up one of our kitchens and provide hot meals, all of which is just small things, but hopefully when they all add up, they add up to us helping as best we can. And then the other real area of support and opportunity for us during this period had been to provide some content for our fans. And as Mick said, at the point of cancellation, we were really overwhelmed by the incredibly positive reaction of people to say how much they were going to miss Wimbledon. And so, how could we meaningfully fill the gap for them? Not in any way that is ever going to replace the real thing, and that's the amazing thing about live sport. It's truly irreplaceable, but something. And so, we were delighted to put together the Wimbledon Recreated campaign, put together the Greatest Championships, this round by round retelling of archive content, and generally just try and encourage conversation about Wimbledon even without the live event.
Yeah. I just want to take it back, first of all, because there's a lot to go over there, but I want to take it back to March and the decision to cancel. Now, Mick, you talked there about the insurance that you had to cover the event. Now, just to clarify that, that covered effectively any revenues that you might have expected to lose this year.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into the detail of it, Owen, because it's there is a sort of clarity between us and the insurance and the underwriters. But yes, it gave us sort of a full cover in terms of our income and effectively the revenue that we would generate. So, look, we were in a privileged position because of the comprehensive nature of the insurance that we had. But I can't sort of overestimate in many ways, and overemphasize, I should say, rather, the time that we took to explore, the way that we can try and hold the championships. And at that stage, if you remember, the medical information was still, still quite raw in many ways. We were obviously seeing what was going in places like Italy, and we'd seen what was going on in China. But there was still a faint hope that we could do something. But then it became very clear that certainly by the first week of April and the last week of March that it was not going to be tenable. And I think even we consider things like playing behind closed doors, but even that would have entailed having circa 5,000 people on site to manage the logistics of players, infrastructure. And you saw the legislation change very quickly in terms of how many people could corral together on a site. So, in hindsight, and hindsight's a wonderful thing, we absolutely made the right decision. And by making that call early, try to mitigate as many costs as we possibly could, both for the underwriters, but also more importantly for our partners.
What are the stages that you go through when you're making a decision like that? Obviously, it was kind of, you had the combination of everything having unfolded incredibly quickly, and it's it's almost difficult even now to take ourselves back to that period in the middle of March where it did seem like things were changing throughout each day, never mind by the day, in terms of what was possible. But you also had to be deliberate and you had to be clear in your actions. So, are you able to kind of lay out a step by step in terms of the conversations that you are having internally with public health authorities and so on, and with players' bodies and clubs, and in order to come to a decision about what you were going to do?
Well, we started the process very early. I mean, as soon as we saw the news unfolding from China, and even sort of on the back end of the Australian Open, where cases were obviously appearing internationally, we formed a crisis management group. And that crisis management group obviously entailed people from across the business, the board, and key stakeholders who could give advice, certainly in terms of medical advice and logistics. That group met on at least a weekly basis, if not more. That group then formed the means by which we could inform and communicate the wider group within the company, especially the board. So all the way through, we were in dialogue. We were obviously in dialogue with other sports rights holders. We're in dialogue with all our broadcasters, in dialogue with our partners, in dialogue with kind of hospitality partners and debenture holders. So all stakeholders really. But as we went through and explored different avenues, it was becoming clearer and clearer that we would not be able to hold the event. And we were in constant conversation with government, with the local authorities of Merton and Wandsworth. So it was a process and a journey that we were on, which culminated on the 1st of April, where the call was finally made to cancel the event. Alex will talk more about the communication. I think one thing that we have done throughout this whole process at the start and throughout is just to constantly communicate with all the stakeholders, to make sure that everybody's aware of what our thinking was and what we were planning to do, and a time frame around which we were managing.
Yeah, Alex, I mean, just to take ourselves back again to that period, obviously we're happily now in a period of relative respite from the effects of COVID-19 in the UK and Europe. Obviously, there are still considerable measures in place, and there are still new cases and people suffering. But it's not at the level it was then. And I think the other thing is that we are in a period of reopening rather than everything shutting down. And at the time when Wimbledon was cancelled, you had to get that news out there to people who, I mean, we talked about this actually on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, but we're almost kind of fighting a sensation of this being a big deal. Like, it's an incredibly poignant thing, something like Wimbledon being cancelled for the first time in so long, but set against the set against the wider story of the pandemic, it was obviously not a big thing, but it would have been something that a lot of people used to kind of process their grief almost at what was going on. I mean, how did you approach that challenge of getting the news out there in a sensitive way?
As you say, I think reading the public mood and thinking about how we put the cancellation into context, certainly not something that any of us wanted to trivialize. I mean, it's a big deal for us, and as you say, not something that has happened regularly at all, but set against people losing their lives, obviously something that we needed to manage appropriately. I think the other challenge was needing to cancel in good time and judging the mood of the media, and as Mick said, making sure that we consulted properly with our stakeholders so that we weren't leaving it so long that it seemed ridiculous to make that decision, but also not cancelling at a point in time where it was so far away that we were being seen to proclaim that things weren't going to start to get better. And as you say, that these past few weeks when Wimbledon would have taken place, things are different from what they were like in April. But that doesn't mean that the tournament could have gone ahead. And we certainly, have been reassured by the reaction that we've had from the public and our stakeholders that it's very clear now that we made absolutely the right decision. I think the other interesting challenge was managing it at that point in time, um, the demand for content, and there not being any live sport on, and a sort of real desire for people to be putting stuff out there all of the time, and wanting to manage that sensitively as well, and making sure that we were using our voice and using our content to support the messages of others, to support the stay at home message through replays of archive, to support the messages for key workers and the NHS, and really, use Wimbledon as a positive rather than just trying to replace things and be where we're not wanted, as it were. So it's been a fascinating challenge in terms of managing that public mood, knowing when to do more, knowing when to do less. But I think, as Mick touched on, the overriding concern has been making sure that we communicate effectively, regularly, and appropriately.
I think it's been interesting, Owen, how our media partners have absolutely all wanted us to celebrate the window, which I know we'll talk about women recreation in a second. But this last 2 weeks in particular has allowed women to express itself, not just in the UK with the BBC and the fantastic job they've done, but our international partners, like Eurosport and ESPN and beIN and numerous others around the world have kind of joined in the celebration of featuring the best of Wimbledon.
Where did the planning then start for what you were going to do instead of having the tournament?
Well, I think it came out of very, very quickly, whilst we were looking at the different scenarios about what we could do in terms of hosting the event. We kind of set up a small group as well to start looking about what we would do if we were to cancel the event. So that started at an early stage, and we obviously decided to allocate a budget to this, and talk to our partners. And I think what we found, certainly when we spoke to our broadcast partners and indeed our official partners, official supply partners, there was a huge appetite, to still sort of have that kind of celebration. We had to be careful with the insurance companies because we couldn't be seen to be creating value for, I don't know, people like Rolex or IBM. But certainly our broadcast partners, absolutely engaged in this. Using our digital platforms, we were able to create content, as well as use the archive. And rather than simply have an archive type proposition, is how do you bring the archive to life with real-time interviews from the players who would have participated in some of these matches, but also trying to bring to life all the other things that happen around Wimbledon, whether it's the celebration of the foods, the celebration of the flowers, the type of guests. It's allowed us to sort of, in some ways, probably celebrate some of those things a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, really, it was immediate. We were very clear that when we made the cancellation announcement, we wanted to give a view and provide a commitment that we were going to do other things instead. And another benefit of cancelling when we did was being able to redivert our time and resources to doing those other things, to supporting the local community, to doing what we could in terms of response to the crisis, but also, as Mick says, putting together the plans for the 2 weeks.
How much were you drawing on some of the work that you've been doing in the past few years to build out an identity for Wimbledon and build out a presence for Wimbledon outside of those 2 weeks? I mean, we've had these conversations in the past 2-3 years. You've spoken to me and to my colleagues at SportsPro about trying to build out a grass court tennis calendar and trying to create a Wimbledon identity that you can export for people who are not able to get to the tournament in London. How much were you able to build on that foundation?
I think what it draws on, Owen, is the fact that over the last 4 or 5 years in particular, we've insourced a lot of capability, and as Alex says, we're therefore, we've created our own platforms. We've been working with McCann's in particular in terms of building our brand assets, storytelling, insourcing retail, and again having the capability in terms of a much greater extended team, who obviously could be completely focused on the new brief, that we weren't going to be holding a live event, and therefore it's focusing all their attention, and certainly at a time where we're still in a degree of lockdown. Most of us are still working from home. Is to be able to sort of focus that skill set in terms of delivering something very different.
Yeah, I think a few things I would point to, just to follow on from that. We know from the experience that we have had over the past few years in terms of taking Wimbledon to different audiences, that Wimbledon resonates with people for very different reasons. Some people adore it because it's a tennis event and it's a tennis event first and foremost, but some people absolutely love it because they get to have an excuse to have a picnic and make a Pimm's and have strawberries and cream. And so we wanted to create a call to action for all those who love Wimbledon, regardless of why, that was very simple and easy to follow. And in many ways, it's probably been the most successful call to action and certainly UGC focused campaign that we've ever done, because Wimbledon Recreated is so simple, but also means so many different things to so many different people. And we've been overwhelmed and thrilled by the creativity and the variety that our fans out there have shown. whether it's people making up their own hill or dressing up their little one as an umpire at the breakfast table, or using all sorts of things from loo roll to garden furniture to baby clothes to whatever it might be, and that's just been absolutely brilliant. I think the other significant learning has been adapting things for different audiences. So we had our first foray into gaming. We put together a very simple concept based on a much loved classic, which was the Play the Championships game, and that's really to reach a completely different audience from what we did with IBM, which was a sort of testament to the relationship we have with them and the ability to be agile and put something together in just 8 weeks, which is obviously very different from what we do with them normally. We normally have a 12-month planning cycle, which was the Greatest Championships experience. So I'd say it's been a gathering of all of the learnings that we've had over the past few years, but also things that we now want to use as the basis for the years to come. So through the Greatest Championships, as Mick said, trying to build an experience that was interactive, that wasn't just archive, that wasn't just video, is a really useful test case for when we may explore having a more direct to consumer live streaming offering. So not just doing things just for this year in what is obviously an extraordinary situation, but what we can learn from for the future as well.
Mick, what are the conversations with your partners been like around that?
Well, I think on the broadcasting front, obviously hugely positive. And I think just going back to what Alex said a little bit earlier, what we want to do is to give it a framework. I think it's important for us to sort of find what is the right framework rather than different partners going off doing different things where we know they wanted to celebrate Wimbledon in some shape or form, but it was very, very key to sort of give them that sort of framework to work within. They've been hugely supportive, Owen, wanting to engage with us, wanting to understand what's important, not just for us, but how do we celebrate together. I think the BBC is a great example of using the whole 2-week window with the afternoon show, which was very much about the best matches that would have been played in those relevant days, whether it's the first Monday, the first Tuesday, all the way through to what we had yesterday with the finals, and then also having an evening show which was hosted at the club with Sue Barker. The team worked very, very hard over the last sort of 4 or 5 weeks to ensure that we had some great tennis talent and legends with interviews to make it a lot more interactive, trying to engage much more with the audience. So yeah, we're delighted with the support that we've enjoyed from our broadcast partners. I think with our official partners, I think again they're enjoying the noise and the fact that we're celebrating the event. As I said, we've had to be careful because our insurance policy means that we can't create incremental value for our partners. So I think that was a little bit more low key in that respect. But the partners have just been hugely supportive of the action that we've taken, and they fully understand why we cancelled. But also, I think they've also seen that we've still given prominence to both the lead up to the championships and the 2-week window that's just finished.
With that being said, that you couldn't do anything this year, or you couldn't do too much this year, kind of over and above what would constitute, the activity that you could do with no event. What have you had many conversations internally, many thoughts internally about how to replace or how to augment the other part of the Wimbledon experience, which is very valuable to partners, which is hospitality, which we haven't had any this year. That whole sector is dormant. We don't know what kind of shape it's going to return to next year, but we haven't really. I think the industry probably hasn't really begun to explore the possibilities of what can be done virtually. Is that something that's come up?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, in hospitality, I mean, you've probably seen in the announcements that with regards to ticketing, we're not going to run a ballot next year because those people who were successful in the ballot for the 2020 championships will have the right to, purchase their tickets for the same day and the same court for next year. Likewise, in hospitality, a lot of our customers were happy to continue to say they want to hold over into next year, and I think that's the kind of strength of I guess how they see our event, because it's we we have played back to us that it's a bucket list event, and people absolutely have that desire to get there. In terms of planning for next year, we've already started planning, and obviously the key learning for us will be looking at other events. We obviously hope that as we get to the 2021 championships that we will be back to some kind of normality, and we'll be staging an event that looks more like 2019. But we can't take that for granted, and we will be absolutely looking very, very closely at domestically, for example, what happens with the Premier League as we go into the autumn, what happens with rugby as Twickenham potentially host the autumn internationals. We'll be looking at what happens in Paris, where they're claiming that they could be up to 60% capacity, and we obviously hope that as the months pass by, we do go back to some kind of normality, and there is a vaccine, and we kind of return to that thinking. But we're also going through lots of other scenario planning because that's what we have to do.
Help us spread the word about the SportsPro podcast. Subscribe, like and share our content on social. Join the conversation on Twitter with the hashtag SportsProPod. And if you're enjoying our work, why not leave us a rating and a nice review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you want to get in touch, you can send us an email, podcast@sportspromedia.com. The SportsPro podcast. We're listening too.
You mentioned, Mick, that the core team members are working from home. There are obviously key staff at Wimbledon, and particularly at Wimbledon, who aren't able to do that. How are you keeping the site ticking over at this point in time? Obviously, there's a lot of conversation about preparations and that aspect of it. How has that operation been kept running?
Well, obviously, the reason why we made the call in that first week of April is because we hadn't started the build for the championships. That's a major piece of work which takes really sort of almost 2 months to start building up for the championships, whether it's for the hospitality or different types of food and beverage to all the facilities for the players. So that build didn't start. We've had a core team on site who've not stopped. So not surprisingly, the ground staff who are working outside have kept the courts in immaculate condition because it's a private members club too. So the members returned to play about 4 or 5 weeks ago. So we basically have the ground staff there. We also have a facility at Rains Park, which is now open as a club. We also own the golf course across the road from Wimbledon, which is back up and running and providing sort of services for the golfers there. Not fully back to where they were, certainly in terms of golf or the Rains Park, but certainly providing those facilities. So we've had a lot. We had a number of people on site. We've obviously had some of our state team on site. Making sure the maintenance of the club is continuing. We've had a health and safety group who've been back and forth on site, again ensuring that everything under government guidance is being carried out. And then we've obviously had mostly office-based team who are working from home, but as we've just gone through, working pretty hard in terms of putting a lot of these things together. So in a funny kind of way, we're now through the 2020 cycle. Our new financial year starts on August the 1st, and therefore our minds already, like every year, are turning to the next championships. So everybody's focused. We don't know when we're going to be returning back on site yet. We will follow government guidance and our own health and safety. But at the moment, we're working very effectively from home and remotely.
A lot is also made of the kind of master plan at Wimbledon, the fact that there's always some kind of progression, there's always some development that's going on. Has that been affected by the events of the last few months?
Not the bigger projects. So the knocking down and rebuilding and repurposing of a brand new sort of indoor courts and an underground car park and link to the players area, that's continued, and that's obviously the biggest project that's going on site at the moment. That'll be concluded for the 2022 championships. There are other ongoing projects, but we're also being quite careful. I mean, we will take a view in terms of our our budgeting. We'll take a view in terms of physically being able to start and finish certain projects. So one or two things will go on hold. If they're not a necessity for 2021, then we'll hold them for 12 months till the next financial cycle before we undertake those projects. I think it's just having just good common sense. But certainly, if we're allowed to, we will raise the bar once again for the 2021 championships over and above what we did for what we thought was a fantastic 2019 championships.
I mean, we'll come back to the kind of the outlook for the future in just a sec. But Alex, I wanted to talk a bit about what the last couple of weeks have been like, in terms of executing that content strategy and doing it remotely as well.
I mean, a brilliant challenge, and I think we're all fascinated to see what changes that we've been forced to adapt to during this period actually stick with us. When you think about what amazing feats the production companies and media entities around the world have been performing to continue to put stuff together, it's really fascinating. So everything that we put together to go out on the Wimbledon channels was sort of started from scratch from that 1st of April moment, really. And as I mentioned, we wanted to have this spread of UGC through Wimbledon Recreated. Also some storytelling. We did some mini documentaries to celebrate the anniversaries that would have been celebrated at Wimbledon this year. So things like 40 years since Borg McEnroe, 20 years since Venus Williams won her first title. And in some ways, those created new opportunities to get support from players who are also at home and training, but perhaps have more time. So we were delighted to have some pretty amazing voiceovers. We had Serena do the Venus episode, Andy Roddick voiced an episode on Pete Sampras, even Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Cambridge, who's the patron of Wimbledon, voiced a video to go out on what would have been day one. So I think that was really exciting to try and stretch ourselves and think of things that we could do differently. We've had a team publishing content to all the channels in just the same way that we would have done during the fortnight, albeit a lot smaller. But daily briefings, managing the flow and output across the platforms in the way that we would normally do, trying to have a multi-platform approach, work with the social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and so on, to do things slightly differently and test new things. We tested out Facebook's Oculus venues, for example. So one of our live streams of an old match went out on that platform, and just having daily conversations to try and see what the appetite is for various different things, and trying to recreate the experience as much as we can. Um, the support from the team in IBM also has been phenomenal. Most of the team based in the US, normally they would fly over for the fortnight. So we've had sort of conversations at all hours of the day to try and get that publishing schedule right and make the greatest championships as immersive an experience as possible. So very different from a normal Wimbledon fortnight and a normal grass court season, but in some ways really interesting things for us to take on and think about how we can work better together in the future as well.
Yeah, and what's the response to that? What have some of the metrics told you about the appetite for digital content, especially when you don't have the tentpole of the live event to hang it on?
I mean, it's been obviously very difficult to compare numbers with what they would normally be, because you don't have the unpredictability of live sport. And thinking about the first day of last year when you had Coco Gauff against Venus Williams, that amazing win that really sent the conversation beyond the tennis world, beyond the sports world, even into the announcing of a new star. It hasn't reached those levels, but what's been fascinating has been how you can still create mini peaks through releasing content at certain times, building up appetite for it through trails, through promos, through teasers. Even though people know the outcome of these matches, there's still been that mini appointment to view, as it were. And I think that's been the case for the BBC programming as well in the afternoons and the evenings that Mick mentioned, is trying to build that sense of excitement of who are we going to see, who are the guests going to be, what are they going to cover, what things are they going to go into. and that's been the same with our scheduling of our content across our platforms. I think also some good learnings for us around appetite for longer form storytelling. One of the best bits of Wimbledon Recreated really was the story of the man in Iowa who recreated a full blown Wimbledon grass court. Mark Kuhn is his name. And an amazing story, really, a tribute to his son who loved tennis and sadly lost his life early on. But just how he's poured out his emotion and passion for Wimbledon, which is a sort of 10-minute episode, and it's not the kind of thing that we're going to do all the time. But as we know as consumers, we like to have choice, and being able to provide choice and variety and execution, I think, has been another really good learning. And those pieces of content have performed just as well as they would have done during a normal championships fortnight. So that's been a really interesting learning for us as well, and how we can collaborate with our broadcasters to provide that to them and provide added value to them as well.
And just looking at, so much of even the digital operation ends up being geared around events at the venue. Obviously, you have the matches going on. You also have so many thousands of people on site who are sharing their Wimbledon experience. You have celebrities and other notables who are in the crowds, and you this year you have a UGC operation that's entirely geared away from the venue because nobody's there. Has that changed your thinking at all about what that project might look like in future tournaments and how you might be able to bring in fans who aren't attending?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been a encouraging. I mean, we've tried before to get people to share how they're celebrating Wimbledon and experiencing Wimbledon, even if they're not there. I think we've spoken before about the fact that because we are so privileged to have a finite number of tickets and demand for our event to attend in person is brilliant. Trying to make sure that our platforms and our content operation are the next best thing to being there and are an experience that is as good as possible beyond experiencing it in person. But we came up with a concept a few years ago for finals weekend called Wimbledon Weekend, which was exactly what in some ways has happened this year, which was, show us how you're celebrating Wimbledon, have a little party, invite your friends over, share in the amazing communal experience of watching live sport. And maybe because communal experiences aren't possible at the moment, what people have been doing instead is even more meaningful. And I think it's really demonstrated that you can experience Wimbledon in many different ways, and it can be completely unprompted. We don't need to sort of lead people to why they love Wimbledon and what they love Wimbledon for. They're perfectly capable of sharing that with us themselves, and I think that's been really useful, is that it can be a very simple message that drives amazing results. And sometimes we're all guilty of overcomplicating things.
Mm.
So I think getting that balance right, as you say, between what's going on there and what's happening around the world. Mick and I have long talked about trying to have multiple hills that we could sort of cut to, so that there's the hill in the grounds, but there's a hill in Times Square, and there's a hill in Delhi, and there's a hill in the middle of Beijing, and maybe this helps provide the impetus for people to share more how they're experiencing Wimbledon everywhere, because they are, and that's one of our greatest strengths.
I think just picking up again on the BBC, by having the live show in the evening, we're able to cut some content for them each day. Seeing Pat Cash go into the museum storeroom and finding his old racket, and what was in there, and almost sort of turning into a bit of like an antiques roadshow of going in and having a bit of fun, or you know Boris Becker sort of doing the Walk of Champions and kind of reminiscing with Tim Henman. All these things where you can go behind the scenes a bit. Gianna Conta making the perfect strawberries and cream with Marcus Waring. So these are things that, again, you're able to invite people in, things that they wouldn't actually see during Wimbledon, but just gives a bit of an insight into our thinking, our history, our culture, and just having a bit of fun.
Yeah. Did Pat Cash know you had his racket?
He did. He found lots of other stuff in there as well. I think he was more amused by other people's rackets, including John McEnroe's, which he just thought was absolutely tiny.
But just to look ahead, obviously, you say, as you said, you're fortunate enough to have been covered for this year, but we don't know what lies ahead economically inside and outside the sports industry. What's the outlook for Wimbledon like commercially, Mick, for the next few years?
Well, again, we're in a very strong position. We have, we take the attitude, like most things at Wimbledon, taking a long-term view. So a lot of our partners have been with us for a long time, both broadcasters and the official partners. For example, Rolex will celebrate 50 years of partnership coming up soon. IBM, we're over 30 years. So we go through an awful lot with our partners, and I think because we're not a rights holder that goes out to tender every 3 years and literally just takes the largest sum of money on the table. We want to have a relationship, making sure we maximize the value of our rights, which we absolutely do. So we are in a strong position as we go forward. I mean, most of our contracts are multi-years, and in most cases we have a number of years left in those before we have to start renegotiation. And I think testament to the strength of our event is that we will be introducing a new partner for 2021. So whilst we've been in shutdown, we've been talking to a new partner, which I think, bearing in mind what's happening in the world at the moment, is testament to the strength of our brand, that rather than losing partners, we're actually bringing a new partner in.
Strategically, have you taken pause, because you have been changing that portfolio a little bit in the last couple of years, the likes of Oppo coming in, IBM, obviously, who you've been working with for a very long time, but you're showcasing their work in different ways every year. Have you had time to contemplate whether that's going to change at all, that direction that you're taking things in, or is this kind of, I don't want to say a blip, but is this kind of an interruption to that rather than a redirection?
Look, we're always reshaping our partnerships. I think the biggest thing for us is that we don't want sponsors. We want genuine partners who enhance the experience for different stakeholders who come to Wimbledon, whether they're there physically or virtually. So each of our partners provides a service or goods for the championships, and I think that's what makes the relationship so strong. I think the emphasis over the last 3 or 4 years in particular is wanting those partnerships to be more global. We want to be able to celebrate our the Wimbledon Championships and our brand on a global basis. So the stronger the global partner, the better that is for both parties. So you saw the introduction of American Express 2 years ago, Oppo giving us a foothold into not just China but Southeast Asia, but having a brand that really comes from China that is going global. But I think it's the strength of the partnerships, the fact that we still have very, very long-term relationships with these people. We don't want a long tail of partners, so we're currently on sort of 15 partners. That's a good threshold. It won't move far from that level. I think our view is going longer and deeper with our partners, and certainly over the last 5 or 6 years, what's become very important to them as well is our digital capability, but more and more the data that we are now collecting. And I think that's something that as we move forward, that data collection and data usage is going to become critical in terms of those partnerships.
Just to wrap us up, it'd be good to get just from each of you something to reflect on, or something that this experience has taught you about Wimbledon, about the brand, about the event, about what it means to people, and about what it means to be putting it on.
I think from me, I think it's just strengthened the feeling and the love that people have of the championships. There's almost a sense of bereavement, from our stakeholders in particular, because they're obviously very, very close to the event, absolutely from the members and the club, but just from friends. Having worked at the championships now for over 10 years, friends I know very well who've just said, "My God, we really miss Wimbledon. Wimbledon's part of the summer. It's part of the event. It's something that we just love." And I think it's not just here in the UK, but the amount of emails and comments we've had internationally. I think it makes us realise how big a global sporting event we are.
Yeah, I mean, I feel exactly the same way. It's really made, I think, us all feel so privileged to work for something that people love so much, and almost a renewed sense of purpose to respect that passion for Wimbledon and continue to do what we can to be the guardians of it for the period of time that we are. I think it's also given us the resolve to make sure that every time we are doing something that it is what we want it to be. It is that what people expect Wimbledon to be, which is always helpful to have opportunities and moments to pause and reflect and say, are we really doing the right thing? Are we taking advantage of all the opportunities available to us? So, as Mick says, hopefully the Championships 2021 will be as good as or better than 2019. But if for whatever reason they're not, then there's plenty of other things that we can do to continue to look forward to the future, and have that continue to make sure that Wimbledon is loved and cherished by people around the world.
And one thing we're not, Owen, is I don't think there is any individual, both at the club or amongst the members, who is complacent about what we have. I think we're very, very lucky. We think it's very, very special. But complacency is probably one of our biggest threats.
Okay. Well, I hope we're able to resume this conversation next year and after a championships that's actually taken place. But it's been really interesting to hear what you guys have been doing to keep the flame alive. Thank you very much for your time, Alex Willis.
Thank you so much.
And Mick Desmond.
That's great. Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
And thanks to all of you for listening. We'll be back with you again very soon. Bye-bye.
The SportsPro podcast is published by SportsPro Media. The producer is Ed Dixon.